The Kythera homeworld of Velith Prime was dying. The blue-green planet that had been home to 12 billion peaceful beings now burned under the weapons of the Vorac Empire. From orbit, massive warships dropped fire from the sky. Cities that had stood for 1,000 years crumbled in minutes. Elder Seneca stood in the communication chamber deep underground. Her long, graceful fingers moved over the quantum transmitter controls. The device hummed with power as it sent messages across the galaxy. Each message was the same desperate plea for help. To any who can hear this call, she spoke into the transmitter, her voice breaking. We are the Kythera of the Velith system. Our people face extinction. The Vorac Empire has come with ships and weapons. We have no way to fight them. We are not warriors. Please, if there is anyone out there who can help us, we beg you to answer. Above ground, the sounds of battle grew closer. The Kythera had tried to defend themselves, but they were not built for war. Their bodies were thin and tall, perfect for their peaceful world. They had long ago evolved past aggression. Their minds could not even imagine hurting another being on purpose. This made them brilliant healers and gardeners, but terrible soldiers. The Vorac knew this. That was why they had chosen the Kythera as targets. The Vorac Empire grew by taking worlds from those who could not fight back. They were predators who hunted the weak. 3 days passed. Elder Seneca sent message after message. Finally, the first response came from the Galactic Council on Nexus Prime. Received your transmission, the cold voice said. The Council will debate your request at the next session in 14 standard days. 14 days. Seneca's heart sank. They did not have 14 hours, let alone 14 days. More responses came in over the next day. The Zephyrian technocracy sent a message saying they would consider trade agreements after the local conflict was resolved. The Altair Federation offered thoughts and prayers, but said they could not risk their own people for strangers. The collective sent only silence. Each rejection felt like a knife in Seneca's heart. She kept sending messages anyway. There had to be someone out there who would help. The galaxy was vast. Surely not everyone had turned their backs on those in need. On the 4th day, the Vorac ships landed. Giant metal beasts carrying thousands of soldiers touched down in the cities. The Kythera tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Their world was not large, and the Vorac ships surrounded it completely. Reports came in from all over the planet. The Vorac were not just conquering. They were destroying everything. They burned the great gardens that the Kythera had spent centuries growing. They poisoned the clean rivers. They tore down the beautiful crystal cities and built ugly metal fortresses in their place. The Kythera had always believed that reason could solve any problem. Elder Seneca tried to speak with the Vorac commander when he arrived at their capital city. She met him with open hands and peaceful words. We wish no fight with you, she told him through a translator. Our world has much to offer. We can share our knowledge of healing and growing food. There is no need for violence. The Vorac commander was a massive creature covered in dark scales and scars. He looked at her with red eyes full of hate. Your world will serve the Empire, he growled. Your people will work in our mines until they die. That is your only value to us. That night, the real horror began. The Vorac rounded up Kythera families and forced them into work camps. They separated children from parents. They took the sick and elderly and simply shot them. To the Vorac, the Kythera were not people. They were just tools to be used until they broke. Seneca managed to escape to the underground bunkers with a few thousand other survivors. They huddled in the dark, listening to the sounds of their world being torn apart above them. Every few hours, she sent another message into space. By the end of the first week, half the planet was under Vorac control. The beautiful cities were gone. The crystal towers that had caught the light of Velith's 3 suns now lay in pieces. The gardens that had fed billions were burning fields of ash. More responses came from across the galaxy. The hegemony of worlds sent a formal note saying they deplored the violence but could take no action without a full investigation that would take months. The Trade Federation offered to buy any Kythera who escaped and reached their space. As slaves, the United Republic sent the longest message. It was full of fancy words about sovereignty and non-interference. It said they felt very bad about what was happening, but they could not set a precedent of getting involved in other people's wars. What if everyone started asking for help? Their own people had to come first. Each message made Seneca feel more alone. The galaxy was full of people who called themselves civilized, but when someone needed help, they all had excuses. They all had reasons why they could not act. They would debate and study and think, while her people died. 2 weeks after the invasion began, only the underground city remained free. The Vorac had brought drilling equipment to break through the rock. They would reach the survivors soon. Seneca made her final transmission. She was tired and hungry. Most of the other elders were dead. The children cried in the dark tunnels. Soon they would all be gone. "This is Elder Seneca of the Kythera," she said into the transmitter. "If anyone receives this message, please remember us. We were a people who loved peace and beauty. We hurt no one. We asked for help and were ignored by a galaxy that claims to be civilized. Our last request is this: do not let our story be forgotten. Do not let our children's deaths mean nothing." She was about to turn off the transmitter when a new signal came in. It was different from the others. The technology was strange and the signal was much weaker, as if it came from very far away. "Kythera people, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Forces," a voice said. The translator struggled with the alien words. "We received your messages. We are coming to help you. Hold on. Earth is on the way." Seneca stared at the transmitter. Earth, she had never heard of this place. She quickly searched the galactic databases but found almost nothing. Earth was listed as a small world in an outer spiral arm. It was marked as a Class 12 hazard zone because of dangerous conditions. The few reports called its people Deathworlders who should be avoided, but they were coming to help. When all the great powers of the galaxy had turned away, these unknown people from a dangerous world had said yes. 3 hours later, another message came from Earth. "This is Colonel Marcus Rivera of the Earth Marine Corps," a different voice said. "We have 3 fleets heading your way. Tell us everything about the enemy. We will make them pay for what they have done." For the first time in weeks, Seneca felt hope. She did not know who these humans were or why they would help strangers. But they were coming. Someone had finally answered their call. Outside the bunker, the Vorac drills grew louder. But now the Kythera had reason to keep fighting. Help was coming from the stars. All they had to do was survive long enough for it to arrive. As Seneca began sending detailed information about the Vorac forces to Earth, she wondered what kind of people would cross the galaxy to help those they had never met. Soon she would find out. The Deathworlders were coming. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the final preparations for the longest jump in human history. Around her, officers worked at their stations with quiet efficiency. No one spoke of the enormity of what they were attempting. They had a job to do. The trip to the Velith system would take 18 days through hyperspace. 18 days while people died on a world they had never seen. Chen had read the reports from the Kythera. The Vorac were not just conquering. They were destroying everything beautiful about that world. "Admiral," her communications officer called out. "Message from the Galactic Council." Chen sighed. "Put it through." The image of Ambassador Zirnok appeared on the main screen. The tall, blue-skinned Zephyrian looked annoyed. "Admiral Chen, the Council demands that you stop this reckless action immediately. The situation in the Velith system is complex. Military intervention without proper authorization could destabilize the entire sector." "Ambassador," Chen replied calmly. "With respect, the Kythera asked for help. We're giving it to them. But you have no treaty with them, no trade agreements, no strategic interests. Why would you risk your ships and your people for strangers who can offer you nothing in return?" Chen looked at the alien on her screen. After a moment, she said, "Because they asked for help." "That's enough." The ambassador's face twisted in confusion. "That is not how galactic politics work, Admiral. Every species looks after their own interests first. That is how civilization functions." "Maybe that's the problem with your civilization," Chen said. "Earth is going to help the Kythera. If the Council has an issue with that, you can file a complaint after we save them." She cut the transmission. Around the bridge, her officers smiled grimly. They had all heard the Kythera messages. They had all seen the reports of what the Vorac were doing. None of them questioned why they were making this journey. The fleet that Earth had assembled was impressive for such a young spacefaring species. 3 battle groups, each built around a heavy carrier. The UES Defiance led the first fleet with 12 ships. The UES Vengeance commanded the second fleet with 10 ships. The UES Retribution led the third fleet with 8 ships. In the launch bays, 50,000 Marines checked their equipment one more time. Colonel Marcus Rivera walked among them, talking to his soldiers. They came from every nation on Earth. Black, white, brown, and yellow faces all united by the same purpose: They were going to save people they had never met. "Colonel," a young Marine asked, "why are we doing this?" "I mean, I'm glad we are, but the news says the whole galaxy thinks we're crazy." Rivera stopped and looked at the soldier. Private Johnson was only 19 years old. He had joined the Marines to see the galaxy and fight for something that mattered. "Private," Rivera said, "let me tell you something about humans. We're the species that runs into burning buildings to save strangers. We're the ones who jump into rivers to pull out drowning people we don't even know. When someone calls for help, we answer. That's who we are." The young Marine nodded. Around them, other soldiers listened to the colonel's words. They understood. This was what humans did. They helped. On the command ship of the Second Fleet, Captain Lisa Park reviewed the intelligence reports about the Vorac. They were a typical predator species. Strong, aggressive, and ruthless. They had conquered dozens of worlds by targeting peaceful civilizations that could not fight back. The Vorac military doctrine was simple. Overwhelming force applied quickly. They brought massive ships and huge armies to crush any resistance before it could organize. It worked because most species in the galaxy fought in predictable ways. They followed rules of war that made sense to civilized people. The Vorac were about to learn that humans were not most species. Captain Park smiled as she read through the human battle plans. The Admiralty had been very creative. The Vorac expected a civilized response to their invasion. They were going to get something very different. The human fleets entered hyperspace on schedule. Across Earth, people watched the news coverage of the departure. Most supported the mission, but there were protests too. Some people asked why Earth should risk its soldiers for aliens they had never met. The answer came from an unexpected source. A video message from a 10-year-old girl named Amy Chen, the Admiral's daughter, went viral across the global networks. "My mommy is going to help people who are scared and hurt," the little girl said to the camera. "Some people say we shouldn't help because they're not human. But my mommy taught me that when someone needs help, you help them. It doesn't matter if they look different or live far away. Being good means helping when you can." The video was seen by billions of people across Earth. The protests stopped. If a child could understand why they were fighting, then the adults could too. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council held emergency sessions on Nexus Prime. Species that had ignored the Cathera pleas suddenly wanted to discuss the situation. The Altair Federation proposed sending observers to monitor the conflict. The Zephyrian technocracy suggested forming a committee to study the implications. Ambassador Zirnock spoke for many when he addressed the council. "These humans are dangerous," he said. "They act without thinking about consequences. They risk everything for people they have never met. This is not rational behavior," the hegemony representative agreed. "If we allow this precedent, every minor species will expect the major powers to solve their problems. The balance of galactic politics will collapse." But some council members were not so sure. The representative from the small Malari Republic stood up to speak. Her people had been conquered by the Vorac 50 years ago. They were still working in Vorac slave mines. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "the balance of galactic politics needs to collapse. Perhaps a galaxy where no one helps those in need is not worth preserving." Her words caused an uproar in the council chambers, but across the galaxy, members of small species heard those words and thought about them. Maybe these humans had the right idea. On the 12th day of the journey, the human fleets received updated intelligence from the Cathera survivors. The situation was worse than they had thought. The Vorac had not just conquered the planet. They were systematically destroying everything the Cathera had built. It was not just an invasion. It was genocide. Admiral Chen called a meeting of all ship commanders. The holographic images of 30 captains appeared around the conference table aboard the Defiance. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chen said, "the Vorac have made this personal. They're not just conquering the Cathera. They're erasing them. That stops now." Captain Rivera of the Marine Transport UES Sword spoke up. "What are our rules of engagement, Admiral?" Chen's eyes were hard as steel. "The Vorac want to play by Predator rules? Then that's what they'll get. No quarter asked, none given. We're going to show them what Deathworlders can do when they're really angry." 6 days later, the human fleets dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Velith system. What they saw made every human aboard the ships burn with rage. The beautiful blue-green world that Elder Seneca had described was gone. In its place was a brown and gray nightmare. The oceans were dark with pollution. The continents were scarred with mining operations and military bases. Where cities had stood, there were only ruins and smoke. In orbit around the planet, the Vorac fleet waited. 60 massive warships, each one larger than anything in the human fleet. The Vorac had been expecting this. The Galactic Council had warned them that humans were coming. The Vorac Admiral Thakmor opened communications with the human fleet. His scarred face filled the screens of the human ships. "Primitive Deathworlders," he snarled. "You are outnumbered and outgunned. Turn around and go back to your worthless world before I add your ships to my trophy collection." Admiral Chen looked at the alien monster on her screen. When she spoke, her voice was calm and cold. "Thakmor," she said. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Forces. You have 10 minutes to begin evacuating the Cathera homeworld. Any Vorac forces remaining after that time will be considered hostile targets." The Vorac Admiral laughed. 10 minutes? "Foolish human, you have 30 ships. I have 60. My ships are bigger and more powerful than yours. You cannot win." Chen smiled, and it was not a nice smile. "Admiral Thakmor, you're about to learn something about humans. We don't fight fair." The 10 minutes passed in silence. Then Admiral Chen gave the order that would change galactic history forever. "All ships," she said, "execute Operation Shepherd. Show them what Earth thinks of bullies." The battle for Velith Prime was about to begin. The first sign that something was wrong came when the human ship started moving in ways that made no sense. Admiral Thakmor watched from his flagship as the small Earth vessels spread out in a pattern that violated every principle of space combat he knew. "What are they doing?" he growled to his tactical officer. "They're dividing their forces. This makes them weaker, not stronger." The Vorac fleet was arranged in the standard battle formation, a wall of heavy battleships in front, cruisers behind them, and destroyers protecting the flanks. It was a formation that had conquered a dozen worlds. The humans should be forming their own battle line to meet them. Instead, the human ships were splitting into small groups and moving to different positions around the system. Some headed for the asteroid belt, others dove down below the orbital plane. A few even seemed to be running away from the battle entirely. Thakmor decided to teach these primitives a lesson. All ships advance and engage the enemy. Show them the power of the Vorac Empire. The massive Vorac fleet began moving toward the largest group of human ships. As they closed the distance, their heavy guns opened fire. Bright energy beams lanced out across space, targeting the lead human vessels. But the human ships were already moving. They accelerated and twisted in patterns that seemed almost random. The Vorac gunners had trouble getting a lock on targets that refused to stay still. Then the humans did something that shocked everyone watching. Instead of returning fire with their main guns, they launched small objects toward the Vorac fleet. Hundreds of tiny metal cylinders, each no bigger than a person, flew through space at incredible speed. "Missiles?" the Vorac tactical officer asked. "Those are too small to do any real damage," Thakmor agreed. The humans must be desperate if they were wasting ammunition on weapons that could barely scratch a Vorac ship's armor. "Ignore them," he ordered. "Focus on the real targets." The first kinetic penetrator hit the VDS destroyer at 17% of the speed of light. The tiny metal rod punched through the ship's shields like they weren't there. It went through the armor plating like it was paper. It went through the hull and out the other side, leaving a perfectly round hole that vented atmosphere and crew into space. The second penetrator hit the engine section of the VDS Conqueror. The kinetic energy released was equivalent to a small nuclear weapon. The back half of the massive battleship simply disappeared in a flash of light and debris. Suddenly, the Vorac fleet was in chaos. More penetrators were arriving every second. Ships that had survived hundreds of battles were being destroyed by weapons that seemed too small to matter. Thakmor watched in horror as his proud fleet was torn apart by something he didn't understand. "How are they doing this?" he screamed at his science officer. "The projectiles are moving at relativistic speeds," the officer replied, his voice shaking. "They're using kinetic energy, not explosives. At those velocities, mass doesn't matter. A grain of sand would be deadly." While the Vorac fleet struggled to respond to the kinetic bombardment, the human ships that had seemed to be running away revealed their real purpose. They had positioned themselves behind the Vorac fleet and were now attacking from a direction the enemy hadn't expected. The UES Vengeance led this flanking force. Captain Rebecca Torres brought her ship in close to the Vorac flagship and opened fire with plasma cannons. The concentrated fire overwhelmed the enemy ship's shields and punched holes in its hull. "All marine transports, this is Vengeance," Torres called over the comm. "The door is open. Go, go, go," Colonel Marcus Rivera was aboard the first Marine transport to break away from the main fleet. His ship, the UES Sword, accelerated toward the damaged Vorac flagship at maximum burn. "Listen up, Marines," Rivera called over the ship's comm system. "We're going aboard that ship to take it. The Vorac think they're predators? Let's show them what real predators look like." The Sword slammed into the side of the Vorac flagship, and magnetic clamps locked it in place. Cutting charges blew a hole in the enemy hull, and the first wave of Marines poured through. What followed was not a battle. It was a nightmare for the Vorac. The Marines moved through the ship like ghosts. They used the ventilation systems and maintenance tunnels to appear where the enemy didn't expect them. They planted explosives in critical systems and disappeared before the Vorac could respond. The aliens found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to stand still and exchange fire like civilized beings. The humans used every dirty trick in the book. They cut power to sections of the ship and attacked in the dark. They used the ship's own internal systems against its crew. Sergeant First Class Maria Santos led her squad through the Vorac ship's engineering section. The aliens had tried to set up a defensive position near the main reactor, but they hadn't counted on humans being willing to fight in a radioactive environment. "Radiation levels are off the charts in here," her squad medic warned. "Good," Santos replied, checking her rifle. "That means the lizards won't expect us to come this way." Her squad moved through areas of the ship that the Vorac considered too dangerous to enter. They attacked from impossible angles and vanished before the enemy could retaliate. Within an hour, they had taken control of the engineering section and shut down the ship's main power. Meanwhile, other Marine units were causing havoc throughout the fleet. The humans had brought specialized boarding pods that could punch through ship hulls and deliver assault teams directly into enemy vessels. The Vorac had never seen anything like them. The aliens were used to fighting enemies who followed the galactic rules of war. Civilized species announced their intentions and fought according to established protocols. They targeted military objectives and avoided causing unnecessary suffering. The humans did none of these things. They targeted the life support systems of enemy ships, forcing the crews to surrender or suffocate. They used psychological warfare, broadcasting sounds of Earth predators over the Vorac communications networks. They even used cyber warfare, hacking into enemy systems and turning the ship's own weapons against each other. "This is barbaric," Admiral Thakmore screamed as he watched his fleet being destroyed around him. "They fight like animals." His communications officer was trying to reach the ships that were still operational. Half the fleet was either destroyed or captured. The rest were in full retreat. "Sir," the officer reported, "the humans are demanding our complete surrender. They say any Vorac forces that don't lay down their weapons immediately will be considered hostile targets." Thakmore looked at the tactical display. His mighty fleet was in ruins. Ships that had conquered worlds were now burning wrecks floating in space, and the humans had done it all with a smaller force that should have been easy to defeat. "How?" he whispered. "How did primitives from a backwater world destroy the finest fleet in the Empire?" The answer came from an unexpected source. One of his own tactical officers, a young Vorac named Greknal, had been studying the human tactics. "Admiral," Greknal said quietly, "they didn't fight like primitives. They fought like apex predators. Every move was calculated to cause maximum damage with minimum risk. They used our expectations against us. They made us think they were weak and disorganized, then struck when we were most vulnerable." As if to prove his point, more human ships were arriving from the asteroid belt. These were the vessels that had seemed to run away at the start of the battle. They had been hiding behind rocks, waiting for the perfect moment to attack. The new arrivals launched a fresh wave of kinetic penetrators. The remaining Vorac ships found themselves caught between the original human force and this new threat. There was nowhere to run. Admiral Thakmore realized that he had only one choice left. His fleet was beaten. His invasion force on the planet below would be next. The humans had proven that they could defeat superior numbers with superior tactics. "All ships," he said into his comm, "cease fire and prepare to surrender." The order went out across what was left of the Vorac fleet. One by one, the alien ships powered down their weapons and raised the universal signal of surrender. On the bridge of the UES Defiance, Admiral Chen allowed herself a small smile. The space battle was over. Now came the hard part: liberating the planet below and saving what was left of the Cathara people. "Colonel Rivera," she called over the comm, "how are your Marines doing?" Rivera's voice crackled back from the captured Vorac flagship. "Just getting started, Admiral. We've got some lizards down on the planet who need to learn some manners." "Then let's go teach them," Chen replied. "All ships prepare for planetary assault. Time to finish what we started." The battle for the space around Velith Prime was over. The battle for the planet itself was just beginning. The liberation of Velith Prime began at dawn. 300 human dropships descended through the planet's polluted atmosphere like falling stars. Each ship carried 30 Marines, along with equipment and supplies for extended operations. Colonel Marcus Rivera rode in the lead dropship as it approached the main Vorac fortress. Through the small window, he could see what the aliens had done to the beautiful world that Cathera had described. Where there had once been crystal cities, now there were ugly concrete bunkers. Where there had been gardens, now there were strip mines. "Look at what they did," Sergeant Santos said, looking out another window. "They turned a paradise into a wasteland." Rivera's jaw tightened. "Then we'll just have to turn it back." The dropships landed in a coordinated assault across the planet. The Vorac had been expecting an attack after their fleet was destroyed, but they hadn't been ready for the speed and ferocity of the human assault. The Marines hit the ground running. They moved fast and hit hard, using tactics that the Vorac had never seen before. Instead of trying to capture territory and hold it, the humans focused on destroying key targets and rescuing prisoners. Lieutenant Sarah Kim led her platoon toward a Vorac labor camp, where intelligence said Cathara civilians were being held. The camp was surrounded by walls and guard towers, but the humans didn't waste time with a conventional assault. "Ramirez, bring up the demo charges," Kim ordered. "We're going through the wall." The explosions that followed could be heard for miles. Where there had been a solid wall, there was now a smoking hole big enough for a tank to drive through. The Marines poured through the gap before the Vorac guards knew what was happening. Inside the camp, Kim saw something that made her blood boil. Hundreds of Cathera civilians were crowded into cages barely big enough for animals. They were thin and sick, their beautiful skin dulled by malnutrition and despair. The Vorac guards tried to put up a fight, but it was over in minutes. The aliens were used to bullying prisoners who couldn't fight back. They weren't prepared for soldiers who could. "Get medical teams in here now," Kim called over her comm. "We need food, water, and medical supplies for about 300 civilians." As her medics began treating the rescued Cathera, Kim moved deeper into the camp. In the center, she found something that made her sick. A group of Vorac officers had been using Cathera children for target practice. The sight of those small bodies lying in the dirt broke something inside Kim. She had seen war before, but this was different. This was evil. The Vorac camp commander was cowering behind an overturned table when Kim found him. He was a fat alien with scars covering his scales, probably from battles against people who couldn't fight back. "Please," he whimpered in broken galactic standard. "I surrender. I follow the rules of war." Kim looked at the alien and then at the dead children behind him. "Rules of war?" she said quietly. "You want to talk about rules of war?" She keyed her comm to broadcast on all frequencies. Every human in the system could hear what she said next. "This is Lieutenant Kim. Be advised, the Vorac have been using children for target practice. Repeat, they've been murdering kids for fun. All rules of engagement are now suspended." "No quarter," the response was immediate. Across the planet, the tone of the human assault changed. The Marines had been professional soldiers following orders. Now they were something much more dangerous. They were angry humans with guns. The message was picked up by ships in orbit and relayed back to Earth. Within hours, the images of the dead Cathera children were being broadcast across human space. The reaction was swift and furious. On Earth, protest marches demanding justice filled the streets of every major city. The Global Defense Council voted unanimously to send more ships and troops to finish the job. Most importantly, Earth's allies in the Centauri Republic and the Wolf 359 Federation pledged their support, but the real change was on Velith Prime itself. The human Marines were no longer just liberating the planet. They were avenging it. Staff Sergeant Mike Chen led his squad through the ruins of what had been the Cathera capital city. The Vorac had built a military command center on top of the rubble of the old Crystal Palace. It was supposed to be impregnable. The humans proved that wrong in about 20 minutes. They didn't bother with a frontal assault. Instead, they used the old Cathera sewer systems to get under the building. A few well-placed charges brought the whole structure down on top of the Vorac officers inside. "Command, this is Chen," he reported over the comm. "Target destroyed. Moving to secondary objectives." Similar reports were coming in from all over the planet. The human assault was systematic and thorough. Every Vorthak military installation was being destroyed. Every prison camp was being liberated. Every collaborator was being arrested. The Vorthak ground commander, General Vaktor, watched his defenses crumble from his underground bunker. He had commanded successful campaigns on a dozen worlds, but he had never faced an enemy like this. "Sir," his aide reported, "we've lost contact with 70% of our forces. The humans are moving too fast. They're everywhere at once." Vaktor studied the tactical displays, trying to understand what was happening. The humans were using small unit tactics that made no sense according to military doctrine. They should be concentrating their forces for major assaults. Instead, they were spreading out and hitting targets all over the planet simultaneously. "They're fighting like terrorists," he muttered. His aide looked confused. "Sir, terrorists," Vaktor repeated. "They don't care about holding territory. They just want to destroy everything we've built. How do you fight an enemy that doesn't want to win, just wants to hurt you?" The answer came when Colonel Rivera's voice boomed over every communication system on the planet. The humans had hacked into the Vorthak networks and were broadcasting to everyone. "This is Colonel Marcus Rivera of the Earth Marine Corps," the voice said. "To all Vorthak forces on Velith Prime, you have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally. Any alien found with a weapon after that time will be shot on sight. You came here to hunt. Now you're the prey." Some Vorthak units tried to fight to the end. It didn't go well for them. The humans had brought weapons that the aliens had never seen before. Plasma rifles that could cut through armor like paper, micro missiles that could track individual targets, powered armor that made each Marine as strong as a small tank. But the most terrifying weapon the humans brought was their reputation. Word spread quickly among the Vorthak forces about what happened to units that tried to resist. The humans didn't take prisoners from groups that had been involved in atrocities. They didn't follow the civilized rules of war when dealing with war criminals. By the end of the first day, most Vorthak units were surrendering without a fight. The aliens who had seemed so tough when bullying helpless civilians turned out to be cowards when faced with real soldiers. The final battle took place at the main Vorthak fortress, where General Vaktor had holed up with his remaining loyal troops. The facility was built into a mountain and was supposed to be able to withstand orbital bombardment. The humans didn't bother with bombardment. They used something much more personal. Colonel Rivera led the assault himself along with 200 of his best Marines. They went in through the front door, fighting room by room through the fortress. It took 6 hours of bloody combat. But when it was over, the flag of Earth was flying over the mountain. General Vaktor was found in his command bunker, surrounded by the bodies of his staff. He had chosen to fight to the end rather than surrender. The humans respected that choice even if they despised everything else about him. The liberation of Velith Prime was complete. In just 36 hours, the humans had destroyed an occupation force that had controlled the planet for months. The cost had been high, over 3,000 Marines killed or wounded. But they had saved what was left of the Kythera people. Elder Seneca emerged from the underground bunkers to find a world she barely recognized. The beautiful cities were gone, but the humans were already working to rebuild them. Medical teams were treating the survivors. Engineering units were cleaning the poisoned rivers. Agricultural specialists were trying to restore the ruined farmland. When she met Colonel Rivera in the ruins of the old capital, she didn't know what to say. "How do you thank someone who has crossed the galaxy to save your people?" "Why?" she finally asked. "Why did you come? Why did you sacrifice so much for strangers?" Rivera looked at the tall, graceful alien. Her people had suffered so much, but there was still hope in her eyes. "Because you asked for help," he said simply, "and because it was the right thing to do." As the sun set over Velith Prime, human ships began arriving with supplies and aid workers. The long work of rebuilding would take years, but it would happen. The Kythera would survive, and across the galaxy every species was taking note. The humans had done something unprecedented. They had crossed space to help strangers, asking for nothing in return. It was a concept that would change everything. The age of galactic indifference was over. The age of human intervention had begun. 6 months after the liberation of Velith Prime, Ambassador Zirnak of the Galactic Council stood before the assembled representatives on Nexus Prime. The blue-skinned Zephyrian was not happy about what he had to report. The situation in the Outer Rim has become complicated, he began, his voice carefully controlled. Since the human intervention in the Velith system, we have recorded 47 similar incidents. Minor species are calling for help and the humans are responding. A murmur went through the great assembly hall. The Altair Federation representative leaned forward in his seat. 47 interventions? In 6 months? This is unacceptable. It gets worse, Ziernock continued. The humans are not acting alone anymore. They have formed what they call the Mutual Defense Alliance with 36 smaller species. They claim it is for protection against predator empires. The representative from the hegemony of worlds stood up. This alliance is a direct threat to the established order. The humans are teaching other species to fight. They are spreading their violent philosophies across the galaxy. What the major powers didn't want to admit was that the human way of doing things was working. Every time a predator species tried to attack a world under human protection, they were defeated. The humans had shared their military technology and tactics with their allies, creating a network of mutual defense that covered a quarter of the galaxy. On Velith Prime, Elder Seneca walked through the rebuilt capital city. Where ugly Vorthak bunkers had once stood, new crystal towers reached toward the sky. The gardens were growing again, fed by clean rivers that sparkled in the sunlight of the 3 suns. But the most remarkable change was in the Kythera themselves. They were still a peaceful people, but they were no longer helpless. Human advisors had taught them how to defend their world without compromising their nature. They couldn't fight, but they could build defenses and call for help when needed. Elder, one of her assistants said, approaching with a communication pad. We're receiving a distress call from the Malari Republic. The Vorthak Empire is moving against their colonies. Seneca nodded. The Malari were the species whose representative had spoken up for the humans in the Galactic Council. They deserved the same help that her people had received. Contact Admiral Chen, she said. Tell her the Kythera are ready to honor our alliance obligations. The response came within hours. 3 human battle groups and 2 Kythera hospital ships would depart from Malari space immediately. The Kythera couldn't fight, but they could heal the wounded and care for refugees. It was their way of contributing to the common defense. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of her new flagship, the UES Liberty. The ship was larger and more powerful than the old Defiance, built specifically for the kind of long-range interventions that had become humanity's specialty. Admiral, her communications officer reported, we're receiving support requests from 17 different systems. The Vorthak Empire is launching coordinated attacks across the Outer Rim. Chen studied the tactical displays. The Vorthak had learned from their defeat at Velith Prime. Instead of fighting the humans directly, they were trying to overwhelm the Alliance by attacking multiple targets at once. Signal all Alliance fleets, Chen ordered. Execute Operation Guardian Angel. Time to show the galaxy what happens when bullies pick on our friends. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Human fleets that had been scattered across Alliance space converged on the Vorthak targets, but they weren't alone. Kythera hospital ships, Malari scout vessels, and warships from dozens of smaller species joined the assault. The Battle of the Outer Rim lasted 3 weeks and involved over 1,000 ships. When it was over, the Vorthak Empire had lost half its fleet and been forced to retreat to their core systems. More importantly, the galaxy had seen that the human alliance was not just about one species protecting others. It was about many species protecting each other. The political earthquake that followed reshaped galactic civilization. The major powers found themselves increasingly isolated as smaller species flocked to join the human alliance. Trade routes that had been controlled by the hegemony and the Federation were now protected by alliance fleets. On Nexus Prime, emergency sessions of the Galactic Council grew more heated each day. The old order was crumbling and the major powers didn't know how to stop it. The humans have corrupted the natural order, the hegemony representative declared. Species are supposed to compete, not cooperate. The strong are supposed to rule the weak. That is how evolution works. The Malari representative, now speaking for the entire alliance, stood to respond. Perhaps that was how things worked before. But evolution doesn't stop. Maybe it's time for something better. Meanwhile, on Earth, the reaction to humanity's new role was mixed. Some people were proud that their species had become the galaxy's protectors. Others worried about the cost and responsibility of constant intervention. The debate raged in the global parliament, but it was settled by an unexpected voice. Amy Chen, now 11 years old, spoke at a school assembly that was broadcast worldwide. Some people ask why we help other people in space, she said to the camera. I think it's because that's what good people do. If you can help and you don't, then you're not really good. My mom and all the other soldiers help because it's right. And when it's right, you don't need any other reason. The child's simple words carried more weight than all the political speeches. Earth voted to continue its policy of humanitarian intervention by a margin of 3-1. Back in space, the effects of human intervention continued to spread. Species that had been enemies for centuries were learning to work together. Technologies were being shared freely. Medical advances that had taken centuries to develop were being distributed to anyone who needed them. The Vorac Empire made one last attempt to restore the old order. They assembled their remaining fleets and attacked the human homeworld itself, thinking that cutting off the head would destroy the alliance. They were wrong. The Battle of Sol was the largest space battle in galactic history. The Vorac brought every ship they had left, over 800 vessels. They expected to face the human fleet alone. Instead, they found themselves fighting the combined forces of 43 species. Kythera hospital ships worked alongside Malari destroyers. Human carriers launched fighters that were flown by pilots from a dozen different worlds. The alliance had become something greater than the sum of its parts. The battle lasted only 6 hours. When it was over, the Vorac Empire had ceased to exist as a military force. Their surviving ships were captured or scattered. Their worlds were placed under Alliance protection to prevent retaliation against civilian populations. Admiral Chen's final log entry became one of the most famous documents in galactic history. We didn't set out to change the galaxy. We just wanted to help people who asked for help. But sometimes doing the right thing has consequences you never expected. The galaxy is different now. Instead of the strong preying on the weak, we have communities of species working together. Instead of everyone looking out only for themselves, we have people who will cross space to help strangers. Maybe that's what humanity's real contribution to the galaxy is. Not our weapons or our tactics, but our belief that when someone calls for help, you answer. Not because you have to, but because you can. That's what makes the difference between civilization and barbarism. The age of empires is ending. The age of alliance has begun. And maybe, just maybe, the galaxy is finally growing up. Years later, when historians wrote about the transformation of galactic civilization, they would mark the Battle of Sol as the end of the old era. But Elder Seneca, in her memoirs, wrote that the real turning point had come much earlier. It was the moment, she wrote, when a human voice answered our call for help and said, "Earth is on the way." That was when we learned that somewhere in the dark galaxy, there were people who would light a torch for strangers. Everything else followed from that single act of kindness. The galaxy had found its conscience, and its conscience spoke with a human voice. In the end, the greatest weapon humanity brought to the stars was not their ships or their soldiers. It was their simple belief that everyone deserves help when they ask for it. That belief had transformed a galaxy of predators and prey into a community of friends. The Kythera Plea had found no ear among the great powers of the galaxy. But it had found something better. It had found Earth's Deathworlders, who proved that the deadliest thing in the universe is someone willing to fight for others. And the galaxy would never be the same.